Join me in welcoming Congressman Cravaack.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here today. It's truly an honor and a privilege to be with you here as well. As I look at the statue, I remind myself of a picture that I saw of my grandfather, who fought in World War I for the Americans. And I remember seeing a picture that I had seen of my grandfather. When he came over to the United States, he actually fought for the Americans, even coming from the Austrian-Hungarian Empire with a bunch of his relatives that were fighting on the other side that they had captured. So it's truly an honor to be with you here today. My father was a Navy corpsman, spent the majority of his time with the Marine Corps, 3rd Battalion, 3rd Marines at the tail end of Korea. And I've served as well, very proudly served the United States Navy for the last 24 years. It's truly a privilege to be with you once again, and I thank everybody for making this a very special day, and our Brainerd band for making it so special as well. Thank you for being here today. It's truly an honor, and it's to see our vets here as well, and it's great being with you. It's appropriate that we take time to reflect upon the sacrifices that so many fellow Americans have made on our behalf. Across the country today, this weekend, parents and their children will attend parades. There's going to be cookouts and days spent on the lake fishing or on the beach. However, at the forefront of everyone's minds today should be what Memorial Day is all about. Memorial Day is special. It is the one day a year Americans reserve for honoring those who paid the ultimate sacrifice so that we may be free to enjoy this special day. And every weekend, and every day that we live in this great country of ours. Today is a day to remember what others have done for us. Americans who have fought and died so that our country may be protected and prosper. We thank God for giving us men and women like these who knowingly go into harm's way, knowing they may not return. In November of 1863, in the middle of the Civil War, a war that had torn this nation apart, President Abraham Lincoln went to the battlefield, just as we had just read, in Gettysburg, where over 8,000 men were killed and 27,000 were wounded, and he delivered the address. Part of this address I'd like to highlight, we just talked about. In his brief remarks that day, 4 months after this great battle, historians consider that the turning point of the war that reunited our great Union. President Lincoln said the way to honor our dead that die on the battlefields is to increase our devotion to their cause. And let me emphasize what was said. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave their last full measure of devotion. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain. That this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from this earth. Lincoln made those remarks at a time of great peril to our nation. At the end of the war, the Union was restored, but at a tragic cost of over 600,000 American lives. The first Memorial Day was proclaimed on May 5th, 1868, by General John Logan. It was first observed on May 30th, 1868. It was observed with the placement of flowers on the graves of Union and Confederate soldiers. 81 years later, in June 1944, during another great time of peril to our nation, American soldiers stormed beaches in Normandy, France. Thousands died. Thousands more were wounded. Our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines freed a continent. By August 1945, the Empire of Japan was also defeated, and the world once again took a deep, fresh breath of freedom. That's what Americans do. Americans confront evil when we see it, then we defeat it. We shouldn't kid ourselves, though. Evil is very patient and lies in wait to exploit the weakness of those who are free. We, as a free nation, must always be vigilant and let our strength also be our shield. In the years that followed World War II, America helped rebuild Europe and Japan. You see, Americans do that too. Americans are good people. We're generous people. We're benevolent people. Americans have a history of coming to the aids of others, sometimes at the expense of our own needs and priorities. Our country has sacrificed much so that others may live in freedom and liberty. The Americans we honor today have paid that ultimate price. The least we can do is remember them, thank them, honor their memories for their selfless sacrifice. Today is a day of reverence. Each of us here today should remember those who have gone before us, our family members, our loved ones, our neighbors, our friends, who, when their country called, were there and gave all they had, their lives. Our nation has been built upon acts of heroism and sacrifice. Just last week, we honored those who died while serving with the Merchant Marine. And this particularly harrowing and touching incident involves a convoy of 3 ships and 3 Coast Guard cutters passing through Torpedo Alley, some 100 miles off the coast of Greenland, on 1 a.m., February 3rd, 1943. The submarine U-223 fired a volley of 3 torpedoes, one of which hit the midsection of the Dorchester, a U.S. Army transport ship with more than 900 men on board. Ammonia and oil were everywhere in the fast-sinking vessel and upon the freezing sea. 4 chaplains were on board. 2 Protestant pastors, a Catholic priest, and a Jewish rabbi were among the first on deck, calming them and passing out life jackets. When they ran out, they took off their own life jackets and placed them upon the waiting soldiers without regard to faith or race. Approximately 18 minutes after the explosion, the ship went down. The chaplains were last seen by witnesses standing arm in arm on the capsized hull of the ship, each praying in their own way for the care of the men. Out of 900, almost 700 died that day, in the 3rd largest loss at sea of its kind in the United States during World War II. Today, there's a stained glass window dedicated to the 4 brave patriots at Fort Snelling in St. Paul. More than 1 million Americans, service members, have died in our nation's wars. Beginning with colonial soldiers taking up arms in 1775 for fight for our independence against overwhelming odds. More than 2 centuries of service members have died so that we may live our lives in peace. We take so much for granted today. Our attention span for many Americans is all too short. So quickly we forget to ask why are our service members and women and family members what they have sacrificed. We send our young people off faraway lands with the intent of securing our safety here at home. We send them to the remotest parts of the world, and unfortunately, we lose focus as to why they are there and what they are doing on our behalf. Each of these heroes is owed a great debt, a debt that cannot appear on any balance sheet, nor is it a debt, regrettably, that can ever be repaid. All we can do is ensure that their sacrifice was not made in vain, and vow that we will continue to carry forward the torch of freedom. As a grateful nation, we must renew our resolve that their sacrifices will never, ever be forgotten. You know, people ask me, they say, what's the toughest part of being a congressman? For me, the answer is tragically an easy one. The hardest part has been trying to find the right words to comfort a father who had just lost his son in Afghanistan. It's an impossible task. It's heartbreaking. We must dedicate ourselves to preserving the dignity and showing the deepest of respect for our fallen soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines when they return home. President Ronald Reagan once said, in speaking of our dead, we must always remember that peace is a fragile thing that needs constant vigilance. We owe them a promise to look at the world with a steady gaze and perhaps resigned toughness, knowing that we have adversaries in this world and challenges, and the only way to meet them and maintain the peace is by staying strong. President Reagan's words have been summarized as peace through strength. We must stay strong if we truly care about peace. I know that many of you here today are either actively serving or have served, and we thank you. Whether it was during World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, or wherever you have served, we thank you for your dedication and service to our great nation. In closing, this is a day that mourns the loss of the men and women in uniform. We will continue to honor them by completing the mission for which they gave their lives, to protect freedom from oppression, and to lay the foundation of peace for the next generation of Americans. Today, we pray for those who lie in graves here, on foreign soils, or in the ocean depths. We are unwavering and resolved that their sacrifice will always be remembered by a grateful nation. Thank you again for the kind invitation for being here today. May God continue to bless our troops. May God continue to bless the great state of Minnesota. And may God continue to bless our great nation. Thank you.